All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of our October GASAC meeting. Hope everyone enjoyed dinner last night and the conversation. I know I did. It was just a great time and really looking forward to the conversation today. Slight change in the agenda. I wanted to start by acknowledging some of the departing members that we have, or really all the departing members that we have. As with every fall meeting, this is where we say goodbye and hopefully continued engagement with future GASB projects. To our members that are departing, thank you for all their service. And we have 4 members that are departing our council, this being their last meeting. Karen Caraher, 2020 to 2025 with NASRA. Ricky Hatch, 2020 to 2025 with NACO. Suzanne Lowenson, 2022 to 2025, and our vice chair from AAA, and Karen Wiseman, 2020 to 2025 of this ASBOI. Just really wanted to thank you all for your contributions. You've been just such great members of this council. Thank you for your leadership, Suzanne, as our vice chair. Just really appreciate all that you have brought to this council. And as I said, looking forward to continued involvement and engagement with all the things that is in front of the GASB. So just please join me in thanking them for their service and hoping to see them down the road with future projects. So. And for Karen, just to kind of close this loop, we'll be sending, there's a thank you gift that Lisa has been passing around, and we'll be sending Karen her gift. And again, thank you for all that you brought. So the next item on the agenda is our report of the Financial Accounting Foundation. The FAF Executive Director, Erin Hill, is here to share her report, and hopefully you all got a chance to meet Erin. I know I had a great conversation with her yesterday, so excited for all that she's going to bring to the FAF and her leadership. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Congratulations to you all, and thank you for your service as well. Really makes a difference what you're doing on behalf of this committee. My name is Erin Hill. I'm delighted to be here with all of you. Thank you very much for the warm welcome that I had last night. I want to start off by formally introducing myself. I had the honor and privilege of being appointed to this role effective October 1st. So I am a whopping 21 days in. So this update is not really my update, to be honest, but I'll do the best I can. No, I thought I'd share a little bit about myself. I spent really the last 30 years on Wall Street. In banking primarily, JP Morgan almost 15 years, BNY Mellon 6 years. I'm an M&A lawyer before I went into the banking space, but I started my career as an auditor, as an accountant. I'm a CPA also. Started at Arthur Andersen, one of the best jobs I've ever had. Really a great memory of working in a professional environment for the first time in my life, and I just have such fond memories of that. I also have fond memories of the FASB pronouncements coming out and those little leaflets and flipping to the page and trying to understand how that applies to my clients. And so it feels very full circle to have this job and this opportunity to be here with all of you. So again, it is an honor and privilege for me to be here. And I want you to know that whether it's here today, at a next meeting, anytime in between, I am at your disposal. I'm here. I will be here consistently. I want to hear what you're talking about, and I want to hear how the Financial Accounting Foundation and me in my role can support you in your role. Your jobs are incredibly important, and I want you to feel like we're here behind the scenes to support you, to enable you to do your jobs incredibly well. I also want to mention that my predecessor, John Auchincloss, who you all had the pleasure to meet, he has graciously agreed to stay on until December 31st. He's been an amazing partner to me, showing me the ropes and getting me started. And we will be recognizing him and his service at the November board meeting. So I'm very hopeful that you will all be there to thank him for his service as well. So when we think about these updates, we think about, what is the role of Financial Accounting Foundation? And one of the most important jobs of that is the appointment of each of you, the boards, and of course the trustees. So that's the primary focus of my update to all of you today. Since John's last update to you all, the trustee group and the appointments committee have met several times. And in addition to appointing me in my role in August, they also appointed the replacement or the new chair of the board of the Financial Accounting Foundation, and that is Dahlia Bloss. She will actually be, although she starts effectively January 1st, she will be attending the November board meeting. So I hope that many of you have the opportunity to meet her there as well. Dahlia is taking over for Ed Bernard, who we will also recognize at the November board meeting for his service. Dahlia, if you don't know her, is a very, very seasoned professional who's a lawyer, a partner at Sullivan and Cromwell in the investment space. And she's also spent a great deal of time at the SEC. So we think that her knowledge and relationships are going to be very, very valuable as we continue to, as she continues to steward the Financial Accounting Foundation in the years to come. In addition to that, at the August board meeting or appointments committee meeting, the appointments committee did the very kind and invaluable act of reappointing Jackie in her role. So Jackie, thank you very much for your service, Jackie Reck, on the GASB board. She began her service in July of 2022 and will continue to serve until 2032. It is such a wonderful thing that you would dedicate 10 years to this effort, and I'm sure prior to that even more. So it is a service of real love and dedication, and I just want to thank you for your service and again for all of you. In addition, Fred Cannon was also reappointed to the FASB board for his second term. He had started in 21, will stay until 2031. Again, a recognition of 10 years of service in a very, very important role. So warmest congratulations to both of you for your reappointment. In addition, when you think about the FAF board, the appointments committee spends a lot of time on reappointing the trustees. And this year we had quite a few who were rolling off. In addition to the chair being Ed Bernard and that replacement who I just mentioned, Dahlia. But in addition, we have Tim Kristen, who is the vice chair. We have Lynette Kelly, Rick Reisig, Sarah Smith, and Robin Washington all rolling in December of 2025. So the appointments committee was very busy and trying to find the best candidates, because it is the most important job that they have, is finding the best candidates for these important roles. They interviewed a number of different individuals and came up with their short list. And these names have been submitted to the SEC. But there's this thing, I don't know if you heard, there's this shutdown. I don't know. That just happened. And so there's this question about the SEC getting through the appointments process and doing their interviews. There is a process by which the appointments committee can have flexibility under the bylaws to proceed with the appointments, even if they have not been fully vetted by the SEC. It is our genuine hope that that SEC process will continue and finalize in advance of the November board meeting. But at the November board meeting, we are hoping to announce the replacements for those positions. In addition, although there were 5 individuals rolling off, we will not be replacing 5, because any year in which you have 5 plus the board chair, 6 people rolling off of a board of 18, that's a lot of institutional knowledge rolling. So one of the things that the board is doing is evening out the classes so that we'll have a more rational rollover in the coming years. So ultimately, at the end of, or at the beginning of 26, assuming these positions go into effect, we'll have 15 board members instead of 18. And then over the next couple of years, we'll start rolling it back up and then having a more rational roll off, which I think is a really important thing. In addition, the board is looking for a replacement for the FASB member, Christine Bodison, whose second term will expire in June 2026. There is a set of candidates for that as well, also sitting with the SEC. So we hope to announce her replacement at the November board meeting. And then lastly, the GASB, the committee is also looking for our replacement of our esteemed colleague here, GASB member and vice chair Jeff. And while that will be a loss to GASB and to all of us, we are working through that process as well. So we have plenty of time, though. He's still with us for a year. Okay, and then lastly, the committee is looking for a replacement for the private company council member, Holly Nelson, whose term will also conclude at December 2025. Again, we hope to name these announcements in November, again, subject to a couple of other things. The next thing I wanted to talk about is the support that the FAF seeks to provide to GASAC and to GASB and to FASB and to FASAC, which is communications. And so I'm really excited about the work that Joel and the communications team have done with the podcast called Bridging the Gap, pun intended. And if you all have not had the privilege and opportunity to listen to that, please go to the GASB website, click the link and have a listen. What I love about this is we do have to think differently about how we're engaging with our stakeholders. More of the same is just not going to keep the same level of interest and connection with our future generation. If I asked my kids to write a comment letter, you would be waiting a long time, right? And is that going to be forever? I don't know, but we just have to think a little bit differently of how to engage people and keep them sharing their perspectives, because stakeholder feedback is so core to what we do. And so kudos to you, Joel, and the team for really embracing this opportunity. Over time, we'll evaluate its effectiveness. We don't want to spend time doing things that are not useful, but I think it's just a great put your toe in the water and try something different. And I'd encourage you all, if you have ideas or thoughts of things that you've seen in other spaces that we should try, please reach out either to Joel or to me. We're open to your perspective. This engagement is incredibly important to the core of what we do, and to think a little bit differently in the coming years, I think, is going to be invaluable. And then lastly, the budget of the Financial Accounting Foundation that has been approved by the Audit and Finance Committee at a meeting last week and will be presented and hopefully reviewed and approved at the November board meeting. So that is really the end of my formal comments and update. I just want to again say thank you for the warm welcome you have all provided to me. I really do believe that this is an honor and privilege for me to have my role, and I wake up every day thinking about how to support all of you and what you're doing. What you're doing is incredibly important. And so if you are in Norwalk or separately just want to get on the phone and get to know me, I'd also really appreciate your thoughts of who I should meet. So I'm on a listening tour right now, and if you think that there's certain people within your spaces that I should get to know or meet, I welcome that opportunity as well. So I'll be here all day and share my contact information with you. I know Greta has that. Don't ever hesitate. What you're doing is incredibly important, and we all recognize that. So thank you all for your service and for this opportunity to talk to you today. I'll turn it back over. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Any questions for Aaron? All right. Appreciate it again. Thank you for the time. And
there was a bet last night as to whether or not any of you would ask a question. Okay, going once. Do you really want him to win?
I ain't bringing it up for it.
Well played, touche. Thank you again.
Thank you. All right, so next item on the agenda is feedback on emerging practice issues. As this group knows, this is a great opportunity to share things that are coming to your awareness just through your daily work or through your constituency organizations, and just to bring forward to the board and the staff on things that you think would be helpful to have some of their thoughts and perspectives and potentially projects on. So I will open it up to the room for emerging issues. Dean.
Thank you, Dean Mead, NFMA. In the minutes, it mentioned that during this discussion at the last GASAC meeting, one of the GASAC members had asked about, with respect to cryptocurrency, getting a Q&A that explicitly says what, Alan, you have said a number of times during these meetings about cryptocurrency, which is that if a government is holding it as an investment, that the GASB standards require, as with most investments, for it to be reported at fair value. And it seemed like a slam dunk, an easy enough Q&A to include in the in the upcoming implementation guidance update and share that that insight with everybody, and not just limited to those of us who have the opportunity to hear you speak. So I noticed it in the board paper for this week that that question isn't in there. So I wanted to reiterate that request, since the board is discussing that project this week, and ask that you consider adding that question, which shouldn't be too hard to draft and entirely non-controversial, I think. Thanks.
Scott?
Scott Davini, AGA. Sorry, I got 5 items, but 3 of them were ones that Alan mentioned yesterday. So the first one is just an FYI. Honestly, we don't have a request on this, but just in the spirit of emerging issues, with GASB 101, we're just seeing a lot of governments, the auditors on our group are seeing a lot of governments turning to this LIFO flow assumption for which leads to just they're trying to just pass on the liability. They're not reporting a liability, not reporting a current portion, just because they're saying that they have this LIFO flow assumption, and it just the auditors on the group aren't sure what to do with that. It seems to be okay, but it just seems to be illogical and negate the purpose of the standard. Okay, so on to things that I'm actually asking for. Environmental credits happening in a big way. We don't have guidance. You know, FASB's got a project, but I think it's more important for GASB to have a project, because governments are not only participating in these programs, they're also running the programs. Let's see. Number 3, grant reversions would be really helpful to have an IG question. That's something that obviously lots of governments are dealing with. This is something that you brought up yesterday, Alan. You have the question, you have the answer. It sounded great. I just wish it was in writing in like an IG question for like the one big beautiful bill. You don't have to say that, because I think the value is not just for right now, where we have many governments that are grappling with that. And I think, again, insiders, people who are in this room or maybe that have heard you speak to that, will know the answer. But I'm telling you, there's tons of governments that don't, and it would be very valuable to be able to cite that for those who do know it and say, hey, this is a place where you can go see that answer. Again, I wouldn't suggest citing like the current bill or anything, because I think it has value for the future. These are situations that will come up in the future, and if there was a Q&A that just said, hey, if your grant program's going away, think about it under this standard, would be helpful. 4, ditto to what Dean just said about digital assets. I come from the state of Washington. We got no problems whatsoever, but there is other states that do deal with this a lot, and so our group is saying it would be super helpful to have that one IG question, because again, I feel like we have the question, we have the answer, and not as big as environmental credits, but it's out there. All right, I'm trying to go fast. Last item does need a bit of context. It's not exactly the same. I think we really appreciate the high bar for projects and the limited number of projects, but just as a counterbalance to that, definitely want to make sure that high bar doesn't preclude kind of limited scope cleanup projects, right? Like it should be a high bar at my house to put in a swimming pool, real story. But it should not be a high bar to do the dishes, because otherwise they're going to pile up. So, you got to balance that, like, okay, let's not put in a swimming pool every week with, but we do need to do the dishes on a regular basis. So that's kind of the context. I think that there is a smaller project that I want to suggest for consideration, which Alan brought up yesterday, which is materiality. It's something where we've got this materiality box, and I don't think that it's not citable. Like, you can't actually point to that and say, go to GASB, whatever. I think there's a lot of speaking points about that. And it's obviously people are not getting that. So I think there's an opportunity to do a small cleanup project on that. That's all. Thank you.
Joel?
Scott, thanks. Can I have one follow-up? You called it grant reversions and you referenced the recent federal budget act and 102, and that's what Alan talked about. When you said grant reversions, I thought you were going to say like clawbacks and contraventions. Is that what you were talking about, or you're really talking about 102?
I think that the more valuable one would be the one that Alan said yesterday. I think
Okay.
that grant reversions is, sorry, I was just reading off my script, and yeah, that is an issue. And if you want to put something out there, that would be awesome. But I think more important is just grants going away. Does that answer your question?
Grants going away, not clawing back. Like I already booked a receivable
Yeah.
because I've earned something, but now the federal government may not reimburse me contravention accounting under 33 versus
Yes.
I've always gotten this grant. All of a sudden now next year I'm not going to get it. Concentration risk.
Yeah.
That
I mean,
one, not the first one.
I'll take both of those. But if I had to pick one, I'd pick the second one.
All right. Fair enough. Answered my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Michelle?
Good morning, Michelle Waterworth, AICPA. I only have 2 items. The first item is regarding PFAS settlements. So I think we probably talked about this at a GASAC meeting, but it's been a while. We are now seeing these come to fruition. Entities like 3M and DuPont have made settlements, and there's significant funding coming to our local units of government. And so curious if GASB has thought through or addressed the accounting on this. And then the second item I have is just an item that I've been bringing up for a long time, and I know GASB is working on it through the implementation guide. But as we, as a firm, are continuing to work through GASB 103, particularly the classification on the P&L statement and the definition of subsidies, but also the definition of other categories, we are just continuing to find more and more questions that we have. And we've made it as a firm, we've made a list of those, and we'll be reaching out to someone here just to walk through our thought process. But it really illustrates to us the critical importance of really adding more questions to that implementation guide on 103. And again, I acknowledge GASB has that on their radar screen.
As quickly as you can get them to us, like next week, please. Thank you.
Any other emerging issues? Suzanne?
Maybe not exactly an emerging issue, but kind of my last opportunity to kind of to make a comment or a plea to the board. Last summer, I was involved in a conference, the CIGAR conference, Comparative International Governmental Accounting Research in Athens, Greece. And one of the over the common threads with kind of all standard setters is the understandability of the standards. And so kind of as we're fortunate that we write our standards in English and all of our users are English speaking, but imagine the issues over in Europe where it's written in English and then has to be translated and things lost in translation. But still, I think we should be cautious, like little things like I brought up yesterday with infrastructure and paragraph 10, like how difficult, it was just kind of long and cumbersome. And so I think some things Scott was asking for more illustrations. I think those things are just so important because you have to imagine the people in this room are so experienced and highly intelligent. When you now have a user that is a student that maybe never had a governmental accounting class, maybe was an accounting major, now is in the role of trying to prepare governmental financial statements, and maybe even their auditors don't have a lot of governmental experience. And so just kind of thinking to that next level of who some of the users are of the standards and making sure you can do anything to make it more user friendly for them. And secondly, just to kind of give everyone an update about the students coming out now, we're seeing as academics that students they suffered from COVID, and so there's issues in the classroom. There's issues with us having to And I think that dummy down some things and are not able to have as much rigor in the classroom. We try not to, but so we might see this next generation of students are going to have difficulty with understanding the standards and implementing and things like that. So that's kind of coming down the pipeline. The other thing that's happening, many states are taking away the 150 credit hours. And so now you're going to have students coming out with fewer accounting courses. And that's, we can go back and forth on that. But so students coming, there'll be more supply, but now the demand is going down. And so I don't know, that actually might be good for government because with accounting students coming out, we've all said that there's been a lack of accountants in government. And so now maybe some students that did want to go the big four route or to larger firms, maybe they will have the benefit of them going into governmental accounting. So it could actually help us. I don't know, just some things that I kind of wanted people to think about as, from the academic perspective. Thank you.
Dave?
David Goldman, National League of Cities, and I do agree about the simpler language, but not so much geared towards students, but just geared towards financial officers, throughout the country. I agree the statements are written in English, sort of. I have paragraph 10. I was about to read it out word for word, but I don't think we need to do that because we did it yesterday. But basically, 80% of cities and towns and villages nationwide are under 50,000 people. And I realize the really small ones are probably cash-based, but there are some larger small ones and mid-sized cities and towns that, might have one or two people in their finance department, and they might be wearing multiple hats, and they're gap-based. And the easier and more simpler language that we utilize, the easier it'll be for them to compartmentalize their time in order to get through the statements and understand what the statements are really saying. And that could be just using different ways of communicating. So instead of that long paragraph in paragraph 10, we could maybe just do a couple bullet points or maybe a chart, or maybe even using things like mental models to help folks understand how, the point we're trying to get across with our statements, so that it just gets absorbed a lot easier and quicker and more efficiently for all of our users.
Sean?
Sean Hunstock, APPA. I just wanted to second the comments about from Scott about environmental credits. It's a big issue in states that operate carbon tax similar to Washington State. I know California has been doing it for a while too. It's a big issue in public power utilities. We have, in my firm in particular, has millions of dollars of off balance sheet assets that are marketable because we have no cost basis. They're allocated by the state of Washington and they're sold throughout the year, but again, no cost basis. So just again, want to second Scott's thoughts on environmental credits.
Harriet?
Thank you, Harriet Richardson, Association of Local Government Auditors. I want to second what Suzanne said about having illustrations or examples. I think over the years I've been on the GASAC, you've heard me say a few times, add examples whenever possible, because if you don't, you're going to be putting them in an implementation guide down the road. So I think thinking of those examples as you issue the GASB statements is important. And in the long run, it will hopefully save some time down the road in having to answer more questions in the implementation guides. Thank you.
Dean?
Dean Mead, NFMA. I wanted to echo what Scott said about looking for opportunities to, cherry pick some things that address technical issues that aren't, big time projects, but are beneficial to preparers and auditors in particular, and then indirectly to users by resolving issues in practice that have bubbled up that can't be resolved with an implementation question that require category A level gap in order to resolve. And during the due process on on this year's implementation guidance update, I remember there being several questions that were proposed or considered initially that ultimately dropped out, at least in part because they really required some category A attention to actually, amend the underlying standards rather than just interpret them. However, because I can't just unilaterally support Scott, I have no interest in GASB doing any project on materiality ever. But I think you want Aaron asked for suggestions about things that we think would be great educational topics for the GASB, and that's one of them. And I know you guys are thinking about that, but if you wanted to do a bridging the gap and talk about materiality and emphasize to the broader audience the materiality box and things like that, I think that would be awesome.
James?
James Robbins, ICI. Excuse me. I think I mentioned this at the last GASAC meeting, but anecdotally, we're seeing audit release dates being later and later, at least in certain states. And rating agencies are being more aggressive, where if local units of government don't have timely audits, they're withdrawing the ratings, which really hurts the liquidity of the bonds. This maybe it's kind of an addendum to what Dave said earlier, but that's just something I'd like to bring to everyone's attention.
Bill?
Bill Blem, excuse me, Bill Blem, NASBA. As the regulating body in the state of Florida and the representing the regulating bodies of CPAs around the nation, I think that education issue that Suzanne brought up would actually link into what James alluded to, and that's what you're seeing, right? Is the idea of making the standards, and I hate because I've seen papers on this, plain language statements aren't often plain language, but that's really what is necessary, because as was talked about by David, you have people in local government who, I didn't go to Yale or Harvard or whatever, and so making these standards do what you need them to do, but in a way that simple-minded folks can understand is going to be very important and is really going to ensure more timely financial reporting. But I can't underemphasize the idea about that.
Dave?
David Goldman, National League of Cities. I'd like to second what Scott said earlier regarding materiality. I know we talked about materiality a little bit this year at a previous meeting, but if we could continue to further look into materiality, that would definitely help producers of financial statements, during the process.
Any other comments on emerging issues? John?
Just to reiterate, John Lazuski, U.S. Conference of Mayors. I think for many of the mayors, as you pointed out, Bill, throughout the country, they don't understand the financial statements. So the more readable they are, the more useful they become in making the decisions that they have to make. So it is something I think is important as we go forward.
Abel?
Abel Palacios, ACI. I agree with Scott on the environmental credits, but I'm sitting here thinking about it. And certainly I'm not an expert on environmental issues and how credits are generated, et cetera. But I do know that there are entities out there with environmental deficits. So if we're going to establish standards on environmental credits, I think we need to look at both sides. And I'm certainly not advocating for recording the liability. I just think we need to be cautious with that approach.
Really good discussion. Any other items? Appreciate everything that's been brought forward. Joel?
we really appreciate that discussion. I took a lot of notes. You know, some things we've heard before, we will continue to process. We do listen, even if sometimes we don't always act. We're always thinking about it and trying to use our resources the best we can and make things and improve GAP in that way. I want to address a couple of things. One, John, we're hopeful that the videos I talked about yesterday, the educational videos for elected officials, will certainly help with some of that. Materiality, a couple of you have talked about. We continue to work with GFOA on their Rethinking Financial Reporting Initiative. They're working on some materiality things for sure. That's progressing. We're contributing as appropriate for us to contribute. I hear you, Scott, that if at some point in the literature we need to adjust in order to make it somehow more permissible, we'll consider that, right? But for now, we're trying to let GFOA be the lead, and I think that makes a lot of sense for now, but we're participating and hope that becomes a tool. I'd like to, it depends on how you look at the agenda, where we still have time or we don't have time, but I'd like to see if anybody, it started with Suzanne, and I was going to respond to Suzanne, and she's maybe a good person, but this really question could go to anybody. When I think about the understandability of the standards, certainly there were suggestions here that aren't new to us, but we will certainly continue to worry about how do we write them? How do we use illustrations, examples? How do we make them more understandable? I think we can always work on that. But I want to explore one thing about that in particular and see what you're seeing, if anything, with this. And in today's world, and I think about this with Suzanne, with students more so than anybody, but you could say this about anybody with large language models and Chat GPT and all this stuff. How much are you seeing people, your staff members or your students, use that to try to say, here's the standard, put it in Chat GPT? And if they do that, what kind of response are they getting? Is it gibberish? Is it on point? Is it good? Is it bad? In some ways, there's nothing for us to do about that, right? Because that could have happened for 40 years, right? That if, you know, a CPA firm or whoever writes an interpretation in plain language of a standard, it could be wrong, right? So the computer could be just as wrong as any human could in talking about what our standard has. But at the same time, if a lot of people are using it and it's really wrong, and there's a way we can do something to improve that too, I'm interested in at least understanding and exploring it because it is changing. And I think my personal opinion is people were always maybe, I don't want to say skeptical, but like maybe they trusted this one person, but they didn't necessarily trust everything they read on the internet. Somehow they seem to trust Chat GPT a little bit more than humans. It's just right. It's the computer. It's really smart. And so I'm interested if anybody has experience with that, either now or at some point, let me know what kind of experiences you're seeing with that.
Suzanne?
I would say that in using ChatGPT, if something's nuanced, that sometimes gets lost. And so I think one example I thought of that yesterday when people are saying like they didn't like things in footnotes, if something's in a footnote, then probably ChatGPT wouldn't pick it up, or something that was described in the basis of conclusions, because it won't go that deep. And so maybe it would help in, if something is in the text, because ChatGPT, in my experience, will pull things, but then it sometimes will lose, like I said, that something that's very, very technical, or, something that if we read it, we would interpret it differently than ChatGPT reading it and spitting it back to us. So if that helps in any way, just, probably maybe lessen the footnotes, or making sure that something is there and spelled out. Yet at the same time, we're trying to probably make things less wordy because people now don't want to read. So there's that balance that it's striving for.
Oh, Scott?
Dang it, Jackie should go first. She's probably got something smarter to say. I can say that for our organization, the Washington State Auditor's Office, we had done tests internally on, like, if we asked Copilot a question about the accounting standards, like, would it give us a good answer? And we determined it was not reliable. I think that one of the great interest in those type of tools is that people look at it as a search feature they're like, they go to GARS or they don't even know that GARS exists. They're just like, I don't know anything. So tell me how to get into that. But I wanted to not only deliver that information, but also support Aaron just a little bit, because this would be my question to Aaron if I felt like asking it in front of the whole group. Which is, hey, how do you feel about robots? Because that's what I would ask John a bunch of times. I'm like, how come I got to click like I'm a human to get into GARS? And that's annoying to me, especially when I got to like pick the bicycles. It's just like, I don't feel human enough. Anyway, that aside, what is unfortunate is that we have this excellent resource in GARS, and I cannot direct link to anything in it because we've got the robot barrier. And according to John, at least, hopefully I'm not saying the wrong thing about what he had shared with me, but seemed like there was some type of concern about opening it up, or that it was about like not having bots or whatnot get in there. And I said, well, why not? Like, if people are using these resources, don't you want them to use GAP like as the resource and link people to the GASB standards instead of something else? But it's dangerous for me to say it out loud, which is why I wasn't going to ask it as a question to Aaron. Because I mean, I have no idea about security, or I'm sure there was some good reason for it, but that's my response.
Thank you for sharing that with me, and I'll certainly take that away. I don't know the specifics around it, but I'm so glad, Joel, that you asked that question about ChatGPT, because whoever here thinks that their younger employees are not using it to jump ahead in their work and understand it and interpret it, we're fooling ourselves. So it is real, and we have to figure out how to deal with it. And, if the tool isn't smart enough, we have to figure out how to revise the way we're writing it so that the tool could be smarter. We can't pretend that people aren't going to use it. So I'm so glad you asked that question. And thank you for your point around the robots. I'll take a look at that. Thank you.
Jackie?
So actually, I'm doing a lot of research on AI, and because our curriculums are being adjusted accordingly for that. One of the things that I've found in the government not-for-profit space is, because any of these large language models are just looking for the next best word to put in the sentence, they'll go to the history they've got, and it's not going to be government accounting. It'll be corporate accounting or something like that that's going to have more next best word choices than government will. And for that reason, as Suzanne said, I find that when we use it or try to use it, it isn't exactly correct because its next best word is more in the context of corporate accounting or for-profit accounting than it is in government accounting. So that's one of the things that I've noticed in the few times I've used it. But because it is going to be more common, I'm actually rewriting my whole course for next spring to incorporate more of it so that the students can better understand and see how these nuances have to be addressed when they're looking at it and thinking through it. So I think that as a faculty, we need to be cognizant of the fact and make our students cognizant of the fact that critical thinking can't be sidelined as a result of using AI. It's a tool, but it can't be the answer to it. So that, I know, is what many of the curriculums are trying to do right now. Whether we're successful or not is a whole nother question.
Alan?
Two things to follow up on. Jackie, I completely agree with everything you just said. I would say there's even a shift with the kids in the younger generation, especially the ones that are 25 or under. They don't question ChatGPT. They do not question it. If it comes back with an answer, they accept it as fact. We have to know that they're doing that, because we're going to have to deal with that. And whether that's right or wrong or good or bad, I don't really know, but they don't question what comes back on that screen.
I would say all employers should be doing what Jackie's doing with her students to train their staff the same way she's training her students.
Second thing, and this is a follow-up on Joel's materiality thing, and just because some of people mentioned this, we are working with GFOA, and we've even gone to conferences. I was at a panel at the National GFOA conference talking about materiality. But we've also gone to local organizations across the country and talked to them about materiality too. We've done that with 3 or 4 different organizations. And so I would say if there's an organization in the room that says your organization would like to sit down and talk about that as well, I'm sure that's a conversation that Joel and I would be more than happy to get involved in, because some of it is just opening the door about what it really means, about what it really is, and how you actually address it. And sometimes it gets to my former role as a preparer, his former role as an auditor, what it really means, what it really doesn't mean. But we've done that at the local level in a couple of cases, and I think we'd be more than happy to do that if your organization wanted to have that happen as well.
Dean?
Dean Mead, NFMA. I think, as with any technological advance, the ultimate responsibilities of whoever is using it don't change. And so, say from an audit perspective, there are things that we need to do to ensure that we accomplish our work, that we follow the standards, and technology that makes our jobs easier doesn't absolve us of our responsibilities, and so it tends to be incumbent upon us, or on people in the municipal bond industry or any industry, to to compensate for the benefits of AI or any other technology, by ensuring that what we get out of it still rises to the same level as of quality as we previously had before this new wonderful time-saving tool came to fruition. And AI is no different. You can't just accept what you get out of it. You have to come up with new procedures and controls to ensure that if you are using this tool or any other new technology, that you're still producing the same high quality work product. And I don't think the phrase "garbage in, garbage out" has been any more apt than for ChatGPT and other and other functions like that. If what you put in as your query is bad, what you get as your answer is almost always going to be equally, if not more bad. And so I love hearing what Jackie is saying, because I think you need to train people to ask the question the right way, to ensure that what you get back is actually about what you're asking, and to make it easier for you to verify that what you're getting back is accurate. And that is a matter of personnel training, staff training, and not necessarily what GASB, for instance, might do in terms of its content. Although I think there are definitely things in the way it's phrased in your documents on the website, and I'm not talking about pronouncements, I'm talking about press releases and articles and things like that, and the way the headers and the titles that are used, because ChatGPT is doing this very shallow skim across the internet to make those the kinds of things that they take notice of and include. But anytime you ask a question in ChatGPT about GASB standards, if it isn't citing GASB, and often it is not, it's citing some CPA firm's article about a GASB pronouncement, it's failed. And that whatever that answer is, it's at least one step removed from GASB standards itself. And I think anything you guys can do to leapfrog that, so it's first going to you before it bringing in what other people are saying about your standards, would be a tremendous help.
Dave?
Dave Goldman, National League of Cities. I mean, all I know about ChatGPT and Gemini and all that is don't use it for complex mathematical questions, because it will confidently tell you the wrong answer.
All right. Any other comments on this topic? All right. Well, thank you again for the discussion. Really good content. And the next item on the agenda is Paulina Haro. She's going to walk us through the voluntary digital reporting. Before I turn it over to Joel to introduce the topic, I just wanted to mention that Greta sent around an email this morning at about 8 o'clock that has the Zoom link. That's probably going to be the best way to follow along with Paulina's presentation. There's particularly an item where she's going to click on it and be able to follow along in Zoom will be much more helpful, beneficial, perhaps I could say. So just wanted to flag that. And if you do, please do turn off your volume because otherwise it will get some feedback through your computer. But just wanted to flag that that's probably going to be the best way to follow along. But with that, I will turn over to Joel to introduce the topic.
Thanks, Rob. So this project we've talked about with you before is very important to us. We talked about it. We called it the taxonomy for a while, but when we put it on the technical plan as a technology project last year, we call it the Voluntary Digital Financial Reporting Project. Team's going to update you. We have a consultative group that is made up of, like this council, preparers, auditors, users. But unlike this council, we also have technologists and some official observers. So it's a big group, about 19 people. I know the team has been meeting with them to get input, and they're going to update you on kind of where we are and what's going on with the project. I don't think Paulina is going to talk about FDTA at all, so maybe I'll use a little bit of this to update you there. Financial Data Transparency Act, which this project may or may not end up relating to, that will end up being with the SEC. But everything, or the vast majority of what we hear out of DC, well, especially right now, but even over the last 9 months, is that nothing is moving related to FDTA. The joint rule was proposed by the FSOC agencies back in August of 24 or so. And a comment period ended, we had an election, and it just, that they have not picked up moving forward from the comments they received on the proposed joint rule. And everything you hear from any of those agencies about it kind of isn't about it. It's yes, we have other priorities right now. So they're just kind of not, it doesn't mean it's dead or not moving. It's just not being worked on at the moment, and who knows when it will be. So that's the limited FDTA update with it. Nonetheless, we continue to progress because to us, this project was never about FDTA, although if whatever the SEC does, if it involves financial statements, we hope they use our project and our product here, but we're moving forward with it nonetheless because we think that this is important for the future of financial reporting. And with that, I'll turn it over to Paulina.
Thank you, Joel. Good morning, everyone. I think I see about 18 participants in the Zoom call. Thank you so much for following along. It would help when you see the screens. If you want any assistance, Greta had just, as Rob mentioned, Greta sent an email this morning with a Zoom link. Please join if you can and mute your computers to make sure we don't have echo. So when we talked about, we have talked to you about FDTA and the taxonomy and the project for a few times. My challenge was when we were putting together the slides, I assume everybody knows what a taxonomy is. You've been there, done that. You heard me yabber about that. And then I look around the room and I see an awful lot of new faces and go, whoops, maybe I should have started with, do you know what a taxonomy is? And do you know what is it supposed to be doing? So before we jump into the deep end of the pool and the conversation of the progress of the project and an update of the project, what's a taxonomy? A taxonomy in the simplest ways is a way to organize information, okay? And it can be used to organize any type of information. So before we go to financial reporting, if you were to walk into your attic or your basement and you have a cluster of things piled up together, what do? You have to sort them out. Toys, old clothes, Christmas things, things to throw away, right? You organize them in some fashion. You put them in a location and you know the referential issue because I need to get my Christmas things once a year, but I may need to throw away all those old clothes a little faster than get into my Christmas toys. So by organizing your information, you're creating relationships to them. In addition, you might label your boxes, Christmas things, throwaway, toys, memories, pictures, and things like that. So you give them a meaning, you give them a definition. So the way in which you're organizing your attic is essentially a taxonomy. It's your personal taxonomy, it's meaningful to you, but it creates a relationship between the things that you're organizing and providing a definition. That's exactly what we're doing with financial reporting. The information reported in the financial statements, assets, liabilities, revenues, expenses, expenditures, have a relationship and a meaning. So you organize them around the statements, those are your boxes, and then you put labels into them. Asset, receivables, payables, cash investments, capital assets. It's the exact same concept. And so what it does, it's allow a government to prepare financial statements in a digital format. PDF is not digital. PDF is just electronic paper. It has facilitated and greatly the communication of those PDFs. You make it available to a user a lot faster. But what happens when you, the preparer, have post your lovely ACFR online? Then a poor user has to grab the PDF and use the two-finger data extraction and type away this issues into a database. That's where the challenges are coming from. Our users are telling us on average takes them 3 months to digest a PDF to get to an electronic relational database. And so by a government being able to produce financial statements in a digital format, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. So that's why I had asked you to hopefully hop into the Zoom so you can see what that looks like. What it does is accelerate the consumption issue. So the minute you post that information on your website in a digital format, a user can take up to 3 minutes to be able to have it available in the relational database and be able to consume and use it for their analytical purposes. So it creates an accessibility issue. So every time I talk to people about we're developing a taxonomy for voluntary digital reporting, as Joel emphasized, some of the prepared questions is there going to be a GASB statement 110 saying that I must report in this format? Nope. It's a voluntary framework. So once we made the taxonomy available, a government can opt to do this. What happens with FDTA, as Joel mentioned, it's not in our hands, but what we want to do is provide a vehicle for people to do that. In addition, we have heard from our TCG and our stakeholder outreach that a lot of people in the data extraction side would love to have the structure to be able to train just the tools you were talking about. ChatGPT is smart, but not smart enough. But if you teach it with a semantical and relational model, remember taxonomy creates relationships and create meaning by training it through a structure and a definition, it can improve its performance. And so there's people using that are looking forward to having a taxonomy to be able to train their AI tools. And so when preparers also hear about taxonomy issues, the next question that I tend to get is, then are we, all the states, going to sit together and we're going to have to change our chart of accounts? No. As you will see through the conversation this morning, the taxonomy is developed as a pliable tool. It's intended to accommodate anybody's government-specific information. And so what we do is we give you a starting point, and that starting point is a flexible enough starting point that you can, if you find the things that you need, and you will see through the examples, great, I can use the taxonomy to find verticals, the headers, or the line items. If the taxonomy doesn't provide that, the taxonomy provides the flexibility to expand the horizontals or to put line items specific to a government, as you're going to see throughout the examples. So this is not a template. Anybody who's accustomed to doing state regulatory reporting, those governments who operate in any state in which they collect very specific state reporting requirements, they do it through a chart of accounts. And it's a closed-ended spreadsheet, and you fill out the numbers in the template. That's not a taxonomy. That's a taxonomy. It's a closed-ended taxonomy. It has no flexibility. Because we're trying to accommodate every single one of the 50 states and be modeled in accordance to GAAP, the flexibility to be able to do that is probably one of the most critical pieces that we need to walk through. And so the purposes of the conversation this morning is to give you a walkthrough of structurally what we have done with the headers, what we're doing with the line items, and give you a sense of where we're thinking about the notes. In the presentation, we did not propose any specific GASAC member questions, but we welcome all comments, concerns, considerations, and confessions that you might have. I will give it a shot at trying to stop at some critical points so you can pose your question, but sometimes it's just a little bit easier if you stop me in the middle of the conversation and ask, so I don't lose sight of the topic that we were talking about. So, Mr. Chair, please stop me whenever you need to make any questions, and I'm happy to walk through the conversation. I realize that I'm the last thing between you and you're playing out of here, but I'm going to try to provide information and update of how this thing is evolving. So with that, we wanted to give you a very quick project update. As Joel mentioned, we put this in the technical plan as a technology project last year. And what we decided to do is essentially divide the financial statements, the taxonomy in two phases. We're working on phase one, which is the development of basic financial statements and require supplementary information. And for phase two, we're going to be doing supplementary information. We wanted to tackle the first nugget because this is the place where an auditor can provide an opinion with basic financials, and then we would add the supplementary information to ensure that everything that is prescribed by GASB can be incorporated into the taxonomy. We are also in the technical plan update. The board approved the issuance of a discussion memorandum for May of 2026. The discussion memorandum is intended to communicate, probably in a little more detail, all the conversation we're going to be having today. The structural decisions that have been made on how to structure the taxonomy. And it's kind of interesting to talk about. When we talk about structural design, most people are probably going to glaze over. And so what we try to do is select several financial statements that can help us highlight how that structural design would look like. And so we have put together an architectural design for the financial reporting model, the financial reporting entity, the basis of accounting, and how we're modeling the line items. And if that would be the only thing we put in a DM, you'll probably go, oh, I can't figure out how this is going to look like for my government. And so for the purpose of that, if you see the image in slide 5, all the items above that bar at the bottom are intended to illustrate how would that look like. And so for the financial reporting model and financial reporting entity, we wanted to highlight the application through the government-wide statement of net position and the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. It shows you how we model elements of position and elements of flows. It also shows you how the basis of accounting is going to be treated differently. With regards to pension and OPEB RSI schedules, we also thought it was important to illustrate how tables other than financial statements would look like. So that's why we put pensions and OPEB as our illustration. And then we have to discuss, as we will see at the end of the presentation, the conversation about how do you model a taxonomy for unstructured data. Okay, it's hard enough to try to get everybody's statement of net position on the same sheet of music. It's hard enough. Try to put the notes. That's a lot more challenging. And so we have come up with a methodology and a thinking, and that's where we wanted to illustrate and show you through here. So with those materials, the intent would be to show you how does it look like, to show the applicability, and hopefully solicit your input about whether this work for you. Does it represent, can you use this to model your financial statements? Is it operable? A lot of the auditors in the room see a significant amount of clients. Does this work for all my clients? No, there's a client that is not going to fit into any of these situations. Did you think about? And so this is the input that we're seeking to understand, is whether structurally the taxonomy would be able to hold to practice. Another thing that I tend to prepare seem to get a kick out of it when we talk about this bit of the conversation. A taxonomy is designed and developed primarily with GAAP in mind. But if the only thing that we would do is GAAP reporting requirements, the taxonomy were not suitable for preparation of financial statements. Why? Because GAAP is a minimum requirement provision. There's a lot of materials that you apply by practice. How much guidance is out there about the line item reporting? How many times do we prescribe what to report in line items? Very few and far in between. But governments tend to take a lot of, whether state reporting requirements, whether entity-specific needs, they report what they believe is appropriate for their government. And so now we have all this common practice that when we issue standards, we ask you to change. Now we're using all the practice you use in the real world to try to model a taxonomy. So it's sort of like a reverse standard setting for us. We are normally the ones exerting change. Now your common practice is affecting the way we model. So this is intended to show you, like I said, the flexibility and the structure, and see whether those common practices that you are comfortable, familiar, and you do on an everyday basis fit into the model we're putting forward. After this due process document, our intent is to start moving forward and filling out the line items for the rest of the financial statements, and then start working in a in the next step to work through the notes of financial statements. By us modeling, for example, government-wide financial statements, we notice, particularly in the large governments, it's very prevalent that your government-wide financial statements are very summarized because of the real estate problem, right? But then you go to the fund financial statements, and oftentimes people disaggregate a little bit more. So we have to be mindful about the line items. Capital assets in the phase may be slightly different than capital assets in the proprietary funds. So we want to make sure that we have sufficient structure and adaptability to the way practice in government has evolved. And like I said, the discussion memorandum is intended to solicit input and structure, and then moving forward to be able to understand how to fill in the rest of the line items. So as I mentioned, the due process document, a discussion memorandum is scheduled for 2026. The line items for fund development would be happening after the exposure. We, as Joel mentioned, we hold periodic discussions with the taxonomy consultative group. Thank you for the feedback on that. We continue to do education and feedback meetings to try to understand. I think as we were talking about our communications a little bit in the prior session. One of the hardest things about this project in specific, is try to speak to the varied audience. So talking to the auditors and preparers, you can talk about technical accounting and explain them how things work around, but then the users kind of do not get there. And then you can add to that group of people the technologists who all want to know is about the code of how do you put this together. And then the preparers and auditors look at you like, what are you talking about? So the communications are a very important issue in this project. So your assistance and feedback would be greatly appreciated. We put this slide in here, slide 7, in order to discuss a little bit what I just mentioned a moment ago. So the taxonomy is fundamentally starting point in GAAP, but it's not intended to change or modify GAAP. Not only because FDTA says no additional reporting requirements, but because it's not the place of the taxonomy. It's a non-authoritative tool to digitalize financial statements. As a result, it has to be a vehicle to enable governments to report under GAAP without creating more reporting requirements. In addition, we have had a lot of conversations about how is a single taxonomy going to adjust to all the different varied governments, general purpose governments, special purpose governments, utilities, airports, school districts, and fire districts. We have a single set of financial statements. We have Statement 34, which is applicable to all governments. And so it's just the pliability to extend those reporting requirements to a taxonomy. That is what we're trying to resolve through industry specific. The taxonomy is an iterative process, so there is no such a thing as a final taxonomy ever. It's an evergreen project. And so even when we finally finish phase 2, when we have incorporated all the financial statements issued at that point in time, and we're like, yay, next year we're going to be reviewing what is it doing with common practice. The subsequent year, how do we improve the structure? How do we improve the stakeholder feedback? So the advantage and the beauty of the taxonomy is that it has the pliability to be iterative and continue to be improving. And therefore, again, your stakeholder input, your feedback is absolutely critical to continue to improve. Before I move on to financial reporting and reporting entity, any questions, comments, or concerns? Nope. Okay, so structurally speaking, the first topic that we had to deal with is how to organize our financial statements. We like to call them modules. So if you hear me use that word, it's basically all we're doing is every financial statement is a little bucket. And we're going to be putting things in this bucket to make it work. We're going to be putting headers, and then we're going to put line items. So the numbers fall into that structure. So the financial reporting model and the financial reporting entity serve as your bucket and your headers. So in slide number 7, what you see is an example of very straightforward government-wide statement of net position. The reporting requirements ask you to segregate governmental activities, business type activities, require a total, and tell you to put component units to the side. And so those are the headers that we're primarily focused on dealing with. In the bottom example, we have a government that has only governmental activities and a component unit. And so this is where this taxonomy is not a template is super important to you, because if we were created a closed-ended template that only models the first example, the second government would be in a position of, I have nothing to put in business type activities or in a total. And so this is not how a taxonomy works. So the way the model would work in slide, I didn't number it. Hang on. 8, 9. So I'm in slide 10, which is where you would see the government-wide financial statement structure. This is how the data structure looks like in a readable format. So you have government activities and it's labeled as 0 or 1. Why? Because if a government has a governmental activity, they can put it, but if not, 0 and therefore nothing. Business type activities, the same. If a government has either governmental activities or only business type activities, there's no need for a total. So the total also has a 0 or 1. With regards to the subsequent columns, that's where a little bit the fun part of the modeling of government-wide came from, which is the major component unit presentation. So today the requirement is to put the discretely presented component units after the total. But the discretely presented component units can be disaggregated between major and non-major in the face of the financial statements. So we had to put an option in here for governments who wanted to disaggregate major and non-major. Other governments are simply going to put a single column and disaggregate the major component units and the combining schedules later. So see how the taxonomy has the pliability to adapt to any single format that the government has chosen to present within GAAP. In addition, if you were to put the major component units in the face of the financial statements, guess what? You need a place to put the name of it. Airport of ABC, water authority of something, housing authority of so-and-so. So the flexibility to put government-specific information is absolutely critical in the development of a taxonomy. At the very end, at the farthest right column, you see a total for the financial reporting entity. The reporting requirements of GAAP permit, but not require, that total. Again, we haven't seen it, but if a government were to opt for that presentation, they need to have a vehicle to put anything that is permissible within GAAP. So that's how we essentially thought about virtually every last one of the financial statement headers. Is we walked through very carefully each of the reporting requirements, we added the optionality necessary, and to the extent that we can expand and contract. I'm going to show you the statement of activities only because it's a lot of fun to think about it. But what I want to focus is on the governmental funds, because this is where you really see the pliability of the taxonomy. So in slide 11, you see the statement of activities. And I think the challenge that we were facing here is that essentially we had to put together two modules together. We had to put the top part and the bottom part separate, because of the alignment of the information. But again, once you resolve those basic issues, essentially the statement of activities was okay. It's just figuring out where to put the lines of, you see the headers in there, those are fairly stable. The headers are very prescribed in GAAP, so a little bit more stable. And here the challenge is going to be, when we get around to it, to deal with programs and functions. Not only the variability of programs and functions in existing practice, but how people like to combine programs and functions when they put them together. So that's a big challenge. And then we put together as a separate module issues associated with general revenues at the bottom, because that bit of the statement is a little bit shorter, so it's a little bit easier to model it. And then you just couple them together and you have a statement, a model to do statement of activities. This is how the top portion looks like in slide 12. And if you follow the headers, you're also going to follow each one of the reporting requirements that are permissible or required under GAAP. For example, governments are permitted to disaggregate expenses into direct expenses and allocation of indirect expenses. When we were dealing with this, we said we have never seen it. And there are people provide us examples of people who do disaggregate direct and indirect expense. And so obviously it's a reporting requirement that is permissible under GAAP, so it has to be there. Alternatively, if the government only reports a single column for expenses, that would be option 2. Program revenues, that's a little bit more prescriptive, so that was a straightforward modeling. And then in slide 13, you see the government-wide, the statement of activities, the bottom section. The question that I got in here, are you going to disaggregate general revenues? Of course. In here, all you're seeing is just a very high-level items to be able to show you how the model would work. But in here, the pliability of the headers continue to be the same theme and the same topic. Any questions about government-wide statement and statement of activities? Nope. So what I mentioned in slide 14 is the governmental balance sheet. And the reason I like to show this one is probably because this is where it was, it's more visible that the pliability of government specific is important. So the reporting requirements to report all the major funds in a separate line item, the non-major funds in an aggregation, and then the total for the governmental funds. The challenge is, other than the general fund, all the other major funds in between can be, anything can happen Thursday. Every government has their own name, their own specific thing. Some governments identify the type of fund, capital project fund, yada, 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 debt service fund, yada, yada, yada. Other governments do not. Financial park, awesome. I don't know whether there's a capital project fund or a debt service. And so to be able to model that, the way we came about is essentially we chunked the little blue boxes that you see at the top. The general fund is a standalone column because it's the stable one. Then the major funds, we put government specific for all of them. The non-major fund, a single column, and then the total that is a requirement. And so the taxonomy looks like in slide 15, and you walk through the exact same issue that I walk you through in government-wide financials. If you're a special purpose district and don't have a general fund, well, you don't put one. And if you have 20 major governmental funds, then you can put as many as you want, each one with a name that you would like to use, with the name that is representative for your needs. So the taxonomy doesn't limit you to any number of issues, but it provides the flexibility that a government needs. Non-major funds, you have a single defined column and the total is a defined column. So that's essentially the framework for governmental financial reporting. We went through these for each one of the financial statements, and we had to make adjustments for example, special purpose governments. A special purpose government reporting as a BTA, we took the proprietary funds and we combined it with the reporting entity bit, and there you go, another module works. And so we just had to go through each one of the financial statements in the iteration of the combination with reporting model with the reporting entity. And that created all the modules that we believe are necessary. So in the taxonomy, you're going to see all of those modules shown in there. I just wanted to show you the flavor of what they look like and how they operate in terms of flexibility to expand and contract depending on the needs of every specific government uses and applications. That's essentially the structure overall of the modules that we have worked on. Any questions about the structural design of the taxonomy? Nope.
Sorry, it was taking time to form in my mind. When you were talking about the discretely presented component units before and the provision for them to name them optionally. And then it looked like something was similar under the governmental funds. But naming of the major governmental funds isn't optional, right? I mean, they have to identify what they are.
Well, the terminology optional is kind of a bad word. We got feedback in the TCG. This is not optional. I need to put something. You need to put something. What we meant is that it's permissible for you to put whatever you need. So city of ABC component unit. But if you don't put anything, it would just show as a blank field, and I'm not sure that would mean anything. And so the optionality is to communicate that the government can put the government specific issue. So the word optional will probably have to replace it with government specific naming. In terms of the governmental funds, what we got into this conversation is, well, you have to label them something, emergency services, but you don't have to identify what fund type is, which was the challenge. And so I think that's where we got tripped by the optional word. But yes.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Anybody else? Okie dokie. So if you have the modules of the financial statements, we have the headers defined, then the next step is the obvious step. We have to deal with the line items, which is even more fun to deal with, because this is where really, at least when we were putting the modules on the headers, there's reporting requirements. So it was awesome to have to work through that. But then when you're dealing with the line items, as I was teasing before, how many standards tell you you must report line item A, B, C, and D? Hardly ever. And so that's a lot more challenging to work, because now we have to work with an act for sample and try to make our best assumption of how to structure, what characteristics to put a structure around, and then try to test to see how this works for governments. And as always, the government specific information. So what we did is give you an example of how we did capital assets, but this is the way in the structure, and we were going to be doing each of the, we call them element clusters: receivables, payables, capital assets, of course, the fund deferrals. We'll talk a little bit about those, net position, and those sort of things. So we cluster them around things that are like items to be able to create the model. And so when we're dealing with line items, we are going to, as I mentioned, provide taxonomy provided line items. The things that we see pervasive in practice, well, we love capital assets because at least there's 2 reporting requirements and gaps. It's like, yay, we started with something. And so we know we needed to do that. But then when we looked at multiple actors, people do different things because there's an optionality to do more things. And so reporting requirements pres observed practice creates what we like to call them taxonomy provided line items. If you go through the line items and you go, I don't have my specific thing, then we have a space for government specific. And then the information that is provided for every line item is going to be the line item name, the description, and a codification reference. In the future, there will be a link to GARS. And so that way, whether you are selecting a tag to use for financial reporting purposes, you have all the information to it, or if you're consuming a line item that is tagged in certain form, you can navigate back to the description and the documentation. So the reason I was insisting that you guys jump into the platform is I'm going to show you in a minute how this actually looks like. So for the moment, stick tight to the discussion of the line items, but I want you to see how a tag set of financial statements actually reads. And so with all that information, then you'll be able to convert the little box to the side that you see of numbers. So when you're dealing with a taxonomy, we often ask the question, why do we need a taxonomy to begin with? Especially in the recent conversation of you guys in ChatGPT. The challenge that you have today is that the information in a PDF particularly, you read all this information contextually. You know that you're in a statement of net position and you're reading the first line item, which I have not shown you the label, for $1 million. You are going to know that that's your cash line item. You're going to know it's an accrual basis of accounting, and you most likely than not are going to know that that's a rounded number because it's in the header. When a machine is extracting this information, it's a little bit dumber, as you have reflected, and needs to be told. that is in the statement of net position. It's a cash and investments, it's $1 million, and it's in US dollars, doesn't even know that much. And it needs to know that it's rounded. So all that information gets embedded in the design of the line item so that the machine can extract this information. So in slide 19 is a very high level of how we organize the capital asset line items. This is not the taggable lines. This is just how it was structured, and it was reflective of the reporting requirements of GAAP. In general, you're required to report capital assets, period. However, if capital assets, non-depreciable capital assets are substantive, then you should disaggregate between depreciable and non-depreciable. In addition, if you choose to, you can put them at gross amount and accumulated depreciation in the face, or you can report them net of accumulated depreciation. By the way, while you're at it, if you really want to, you can also, in the face of the financial statements, disaggregate major capital asset classes. A lot of options. At least there was GAAP telling us all that, so it was a lot of good stuff to be able to work through. But governments choose to do all of the above. If a government does not have significant depreciable capital assets, you get a line. Other governments do depreciable, non-depreciable, and after statement 87 and SPIDA, somehow we also get 2 additional line items for those. And then there are governments who really disaggregate by capital asset class. And so what you see in here in slide 20, the yellow line items are really the things. The yellow and the light green are the line items that you can actually use to tag your financial statements. These are the actual things. And so the white line items are just the data structure that we use then to fill in actual line items. But if you're a government and you look at that list and you go, my line item is not here, what do? You add government specific. Let me walk you through a couple of examples. So this is the example that I mentioned. A government has no significant non-depreciable capital assets. They have a single line item. CA 52 will do the trick. They tag it, all done. Example number 2 in slide 22. A government has disaggregated depreciable and non-depreciable. They pick the 2 line items, still taxonomy defined. Example number 3 in page 23. Now you have a little bit more complexity. The government has not only disaggregated by major asset classes, but it has done it in gross without telling you. This is where the value of the taxonomy comes from. Because if you read just buildings and building improvements, and you just read the line, you don't know if it's gross or not. But you have to infer that it's gross because the last line item says less accumulated depreciation and amortization. So you are assuming the taxonomy has to unambiguously define that for you. So the line item that you're going to be using is called buildings and improvements, gross. So that way there is no ambiguity in the information. And there is always going to be, always not, but there's generally a difference between the line items, the way they show in the financial statements, and the label, the tag that is behind the scenes. And I'm going to show you that in the virtual environment, as I mentioned. And so this is why we needed to put so much variability. And this is an example 4 in slide 24, where a government has also disaggregated the information, but in this case, they were very precise and they told you there was net of depreciation. And so that you would use the net module in the taxonomy. And so this is the reason why we had to permutate through so many options, is because the reporting requirements do permit you to go through all those options. But as I mentioned, I wanted to show you how a tag set of financials look like. Can you see my screen that says Community College of the page at the top? Nope. Let me stop sharing and I'll reshare and it will work. Give me just a second. Okay, now you should be able to see it. Okay. And so this is how a set of digital financial statements looked like tag. Community College of DuPage was the place of one of our former board members, and so it's always fun to look at it. And so see the little red wiggly lines? That's the tagging. That's the only thing the tagging does. But if I hover over any of those things, you see how that little box popped out? That's where all the information comes from. So in the line item that I'm looking as cash and cash equivalents, the tag in this case coincide, and I'm going to tell you about the difference between line items and tags. It tells you the fact is $14 million, and it gives you all this additional information that is what the machine needs to do to be able to make sense of it. So it's unambiguous. Then it provides documentation, tells you the definition of it, tells you the label, it tells you the periods that is reported. It provides a significant amount of information for every single data point. Remember, you as a user, as a human being, read a set of ACFRs and you infer all this information from your knowledge of financial statements. A machine is not that smart. It needs to be told. And so that's the point and the reason why all this information is needed. Now, there's also an important issue between the line items and the face of the financials and the labels. We've been having a really interesting conversation about receivables and payables and due tos and due froms, and how are they different or not? And so very many governments use due tos and due froms in the same way as you do a receivable and payable. That's a label difference. And so if, for example, a typical example that we see is a due to or due from to component units, that's a receivable and payable to component unit. So if the taxonomy says payable to component unit and your statement says due to component unit, there is no difference. You just tag it with that. And in the phase, it will keep saying due to component unit. That's your right to do it. But the taxonomy tag beneath it is going to see payable or receivable to component unit. What that allows is to standardize the data, to normalize it. So when it's extracted, it's put in the same line item as the next government who's using due to, due from, or payable or receivable. So there are circumstances in which your naming of the line item may be slightly different than the label of the taxonomy. That's what you will see in the face of the financials. You see exactly the way you write. And then when you hover over the little red box and it pops out, you will see the taxonomy specific information in the way the label was created here. So that's also a very important thing to remember. You do not have to change the way you name your line items. You can keep them. It's just going to be an exercise of you looking through what you have and the taxonomy defined items and go, yep, they match, and you go on. But that's an important distinction that is also should be kept in mind. Any questions about line items and how things work?
Rob? Rob Weber, Bond Raiders. Obviously, I love all this, right? And it is so helpful, I think, and will be helpful for our ability to extract the data and use it. Just because we're talking about two froms, when you look at these attributes, I think one of the things that we struggle with in doing with large amounts of financial statements is trying to figure out where those due tos and due froms are going and coming back from, right? I mean, some people just put it in as a due to, due from, and you've no idea who is owing who and whatnot. Would that be part of the attribute that you have here? Is there going to be a schedule that would show that? How would it be broken out potentially? I mean, just in thinking about that.
So remember the conversation that I started, the taxonomy cannot fix gap. I can't fix that. That's a reporting issue of the government disaggregated or not. I mean, it's a little bit like receivables or payables. If I have a line that it says receivables and you don't know anything about it, there is a no disclosure associated with receivables. And if you go there, you get the information. But if they don't put anything in the face and they only put receivables, which they can, then that's all you get. And so the taxonomy does not provide more granularity or less granularity, the financial statement reporting requirements.
Suzanne?
Just interested, I know that you've gone through GAP and then numbers of examples of financial statements. And so you probably have 99.9% of anything that's positive. But I mean, so if there were to be another example of like, okay, a government's using a descriptor that isn't covered there, like, is the system dynamic that you could change it, or
Yeah.
would it just be like, oh, they're an outlier?
No. So at the moment, I was trying to be careful about the way I phrase practice. So we have a sample of actors and we have gone through it. I cannot guarantee you that we got 99. I can't guarantee you what percentage I'm covering. We're just using, thank you. We're calling it observed practice. But there is a process in taxonomy development where you want to call it common practice. And then when you do is you have a very significantly large data sample and then you test it and you go, oh, I'm covering blah, blah, blah percent. And then you adjust the taxonomy as you go. Oh, this line item, nobody uses it. Throw it away. Or it's just so small that really you shouldn't be putting it in. Or, oh my God, this reporting requirement or this governments in here are beginning to use it more prevalently, or the users are seeing it more prevalently. So then you can adjust. So that's what I meant by the taxonomy is evergreen. And the review and revisions of observed practice yields to a standard policy definition of what would make common practice. We are not in a taxonomy that is mature enough for me to define common.
Ricky?
I don't know exactly how to ask this, but I'm sure that there will be preparers who choose to opt into providing this that will assign the incorrect category to the wrong line. Are there checks that you can do to identify that, or how are we going to know that they've actually coded that correctly?
So it's a tool. I mean, how do I know that you level cash and investments through the right thing? I don't know. I mean, it's the same issue. It's just a tool to digitize what you do today. It's not something that validates and foolproofs and protects you from your own self.
Okay, thanks.
Bill? Oh, I'm sorry, Joel.
Just going to respond to Ricky a little bit. In the corporate environment, there also is no similar function. In other words, the audit function actually stops when the financial statements are issued. The auditors don't give any opinion that public corporations have tagged their stuff that's in Edgar correctly. Now, the SEC does some review and they are kind of policing it a little bit and pushing back to corporations. FDTA, who knows what will happen in our world. But if a government was interested, I don't want to speak on behalf of auditors, if a government was interested in making sure that their tags are right, they could engage their auditor to do some kind of a test function to do that. But that would kind of be on the government to do it themselves, or the SEC doing something different than they did in the public corporate environment. But that's, I guess, the nature of kind of thinking about how that works or has worked in the corporate environment, how it may work.
Thank you, Joel. Bill?
So I know that you said that this this isn't generating a standards issue, right? So you're not generating standard per se. However, I would view this, if we wanted to get serious about it, this would be an opportunity to somewhat standardize some of the things that you see in financial reporting, like the face of the statements and what consolidation level might be deemed best, right? So fixed assets being the simple example, the detail has always been a thing for me. Is I can't stand seeing the detail in the face in the government-wide statements because you have a full footnote disclosure. So to me, you're just duplicating what you've already disclosed elsewhere. So, I mean, I think you could look at this or in conjunction with this potentially in looking at some of the standards that would make this process smoother and easier. And on the flip side of all that, I can't wait to see how many governments are going to get excited about spending, I don't know how many hours inputting this information into the system, because already it seems complex. Obviously, you guys going through the process, it seems very complex and detailed. So looking forward to see the results.
So happy to make a couple comments about that. The board has observed that hopefully the information that they get from these would hopefully help also inform in the future standard setting. But like I mentioned, it's two separate issues, right? But by you having, the more accessibility information you have, the better off you are. And so definitely they're looking forward to data. In the sense of application, I kind of sort of skipped that bit, but I'm happy to talk a little bit about it if you want to. I am not gonna sell you the cost and non-cost issue, but it's also very important to acknowledge the manner in which things might work out. At the moment, we're developing an XBRL taxonomy. So it's a very specific technology that we're using that require government to tag their financial statements. And they do create templates. So the first year implementation, yes, painful. After that, they have a template that they can reuse. However, the objective of this project, as stipulated in the tech plan, has always been evolving the technology. You guys were just talking about ChatGPT. At what point is smart enough to tag for you? At what point is smart enough to extract without you tagging? At what point is smart enough to analyze it for you in an accurate manner without you having to worry about, are you really saying what you're saying? And so hopefully the evolution of technology also could have a significant effect and perspective on that. What we know today, well, once the FDTA was issued, the SEC was required to publish at least biannually a state of XBRL data for at least a period, I think it was 6 years. I can't remember exactly the number of years. So we have been consuming those reports every time and looking through the academic research published and cited in those. And what we know is in the corporate sector, when this was implemented, 95% of people did it by calling 1-800-HELP-ME-TAG. So the publicly traded companies call technology vendors to do it. They did not do it themselves. Only 5% did it. We don't know what it is like today because there has not been academic studies about this since implementation. But theoretically speaking, you can implement it in a multitude of ways. A government can call a technology vendor. A government can purchase a tool. Some other, particularly in the state of Michigan, they're developing free tools to do it without cost. And so without monetary cost, but still labor costs. So I'm not going to ignore your comment, Bill. And so there is a multitude of avenues in which implementation and application can happen, but I just want to make sure that you understand that today the technology we're using is XBRL, but we are keeping in mind on how technology evolves and could this issue of tagging be simplified.
Bob? That question and answer was a really nice segue to my question. Governments typically don't do their financial reports themselves. For years, my city did it through a whole series of Word and Excel documents with macros, and it was an absolute nightmare. Then we switched to a canned package that was designed to generate ACFRs, and it's become much easier. At my new city, we always had the auditors prepare the ACFR, and I, for the first time last year, got the staff. We decided we were going to do it ourselves, but we used a software package. So my question is, have you been in contact? There's not that many ACFR packages out there. Have you been in contact with these firms to try to work with them? Because one thing I can assure you is I'm not going to want to do my ACFR and then do a separate taxonomy package. It just all needs to be integrated in to one package that I can do at once.
Yes. So remember, Joel mentioned part of the TCG, we have technologists. Some of them are data companies. And so what we know about them is that they tend to have, yes, there's a handful of them. We know them. We are not going to mention names. And so what we know is in the back end, they imported taxonomy because they're the same companies that do it for the private sector, guys. So they import the taxonomy in the back end. And so when you're generating your ACFR, you just save to PDF and save to HTML. So you don't have to do anything additional. If you're already using an ACFR preparation package from a software company like that, the likelihood of them back-ending the taxonomy is there. There is still an implementation issue because you're going to have to map all the things that you do in your package to the taxonomy, but once it's implemented in the way you use it today as a template, you would use it tomorrow as a template. So you just print HTML and you're done. We also have an awful lot of auditors very engaged in these conversations, and we have as them part of the TCG meetings. We suspect that their services may include this component if that were come to fruition. So they're part of the conversation. Anybody who wants to talk to us about taxonomy, happy to talk to them, but we're familiar with that.
Scott?
Scott Davini, AGA. Just want to tag on to the first part of Bill's comment about standardization. That's another thing that just super excited about this project, very cool, and also excited about the potential for standardization, understanding and affirming what Paulina said, just like the project should not create standardization. It should be standard setting that creates standardization. And this project is just, yeah, exactly. So I think that the implications for standard setting have always been there. And I think a project like this simply brings all that stuff into focus. So while this project, this super cool project, will probably take many years to get to the end, I think the implications are already there for, the more prescriptive we can be, the better. And hopefully in the future, when we get this data, it will then give the board so much better information to make those types of decisions. Super cool. Thank you.
Back to you, Paulina.
Great, thank you very much. Let me do the stop share and transfer back to my slides. You see the slides now? Cool.
Paulina, I'm struggling whether to respond to what Scott and others just said, and you took long enough doing that I can stop. I just want us to be careful. The objective of this project is not to standardize data. It's to provide structure to data. Through that structure, this was closer to what Bill said than you said, but you built off Bill. Might it encourage governments, because they see the structure, to move towards a little bit of standardization? It might, right? But that's not an objective of what we're doing. I don't want the message to be that that's what this project is doing. This project is about, and then there's also the whole, we have now data, and do we change GAP to provide more? That's certainly a thing that could happen. But again, not another objective of this. The objective of this is to modernize the way governments report their financial information currently using GAP.
I
Full
understand and
stop.
affirm that.
Okay.
Yep.
I just
Agreed.
wanted to not have the message get too much out that we're somehow standardizing, and then governments are going to go, whoa, because there's important parts of, we have different sectors. We have airports and public power authorities and higher ed institutions and healthcare institutions. And we're trying to create this for all of them, not separate ones for each of them. And so it's got to have the flexibility to allow for all those industries to report using this taxonomy. And so by nature, it's not going to ever fully be standardized in that way. So just.
It's actually one of the things that's making it really hard for the project team, because we talk about an accordion all the time. And what project teams having to do is build this in a way where, because we've talked before, you don't have to change your financial reporting process. You don't have to do anything different today than you're going to do tomorrow. But in order to do that, we talk about this accordion where it's got to be able to expand and contrast as it needs to be able to let everybody in this room and every government that produces an act for today produce their act for the exact same way, but then tag it in conjunction with the taxonomy. So it creates, and you saw it in some of the graphs that you saw in some of the spreadsheets, it creates the ability to have to be able to have all these extra columns when maybe, or all these extra lines, so you can have this thing can expand and contract to allow everybody to use it. But that was the fundamental start of, we're just going to design this to be consistent with GAP as it exists today. And that makes that, and I know from the product team side, it makes it very complicated in terms of how to build all this, because all that optionality is in GAP today. And so therefore we have to deal with that. And that's making this project really hard for them.
I think I have become potentially tone deaf to the standardization word for a different reason. So when we talk to preparers, we try to convey very clearly the message that Joel and Alan had just done. You will have the ability to provide whatever level of detail you choose to. But then when you're on the other side speaking with the users, so when the people in here are extracting the data, because they have a standardized tag and a standardized structure, the output for the user is more stable and is more comparable. But it's not the virtue of you changing your financial reports. It's a virtue of the structure of the data that helps. And so that's probably, it's important to differentiate what standardization means.
And I would call that structure, right? Because I was going to wait to, because you're about to go through the specific line items and what they do. But to Rob Weber's point earlier, right, that it, let's say it's the subheaders and the structure you're adding, that within assets you have receivables, and within receivables you might have external and internal. And if I create my own due from XYZ corporation, where I have to, and you're about to do this, so I'm at where you associate that tag you created, or where we put the common practice items we described within external, within with receivables, then as Rob has data, now he has a structure, kind of an architecture around the data, that now as he elevates up a level, he's not just going straight up to assets and all these line items are under an asset category. Now they're within a structure. Now I can organize my data better and I have more idea. I call that more structure than standardization, but it is a benefit of what we're doing that users will see, even though the preparers don't change anything about what they do in their PDFs.
Suzanne, you had a comment?
It's just a minor thing, but I think another an indirect benefit of the project, though, is going to be the availability of data for the markets, but then also for academics who've tried to do research and had to hand collect things, and there still will be error involved, like there is with Edgar, but also just the availability will increase.
We're looking forward to all that research and new accounting students.
Dave?
David Goldman, National League of Cities. Yeah, we're definitely looking forward to having one standardized methodology to report the data out, nationwide. But my question is going to be a little bit into the weeds. So currently, when we're preparing when we put our line items together and we prepare our financial reports and everything, we have different levels, like different segments of the line item. And right now, like, we have 6 segments, and 2 of those segments are dedicated to the Washington State bars requirements. Thank you, Scott. And Washington State has a pretty good system where all the entities have to upload their data into their format, and they're able to display the data out on their website, the State Auditor Office Financial Intelligence Tool. So everything's comparable, which is great. But the question I guess I would have for all the preparers in my state is, would we now have to add additional segments to our line items in order to better categorize everything so they fit into this categorization taxonomy scheme? Or do we see this eventually replacing all the state-specific stuff into one national type standard, so that we don't have to keep, like, exploding the number of line items we have, but we could kind of just have everything under one roof? Because you see what I'm saying? You still have to follow the state, whatever our state guidelines are. Like for Washington State, it's the bars. We have to make sure those codes are in there. But with this new system, which is actually a great benefit, since we can have nationwide comparability, which is great for research and comparisons. Like when I go and talk to my city council about how we're doing compared to our other cities, I pretty much have to keep within my state. But there's cities throughout the country which might be a better fit. Like, we're a military community, and it's a smaller group of comparables, so it's harder to find just within Washington State. So it'd be great to go nationwide. But the thing is, like, how do you foresee the future when it comes to this? Would we eventually replace the state requirements so that we don't have to go to 7, 8, 9 segments or like, I don't know.
Do I put you in the spot or not?
I mean, sure, if you want. Yeah, I mean, I think what you're talking about, David, is your chart of accounts. And what Paulina is talking about is a tagging system. So it doesn't have to be integrated into your chart of accounts. I mean, I think that the objective of the project is not to replace all the state systems or everything else, but I think there may be like a pressure or an implication that things will become more unified, which is, I think, a great benefit for everybody. But yeah, I don't think it replaces those things, and it doesn't have to, and it doesn't have to have any effect on your chart of accounts.
I appreciate that. I think one of the things that some people sell this solution or technology as, it solves all the problems because you will have a single set of information and send it everywhere. That's not true. Because the problem is we are modeling according to GAAP for GAAP purposes. Then every regulatory entity that requires you to have a different information and a different slicing and dicing is responsible for a different thing. So for example, without putting Scott in any more spot that I already did, the state of Washington, North Carolina, Ohio, California, there's a handful of states that have very sophisticated collection methodologies, Florida, and they already have XBRL. Collect data in very standardized formats and do exactly what you're describing, David. They comp their cities, the localities and stuff like that. But like you mentioned, is state specific. So if we were managed to persuade all the states that I mentioned to use just gap collection and they use the taxonomy, then sure, then you don't have to set up a state. But it's really up to every state to change their own regulatory requirements, their own collection of data. And so this is a thing where one of the very, very bad myths that this project FDTA has sold is, oh, it's fantastic because then we were going to have just a single set of financial information to solve all the problems. That's not the case. And it's not our objective in this project. And even if it were, we couldn't fix that. We couldn't walk around. I mean, we would have to sit with all the states and said, okay, how do you want to create your new chart of accounts? Not the objective of this. So just be mindful of that.
Jeff?
Yeah, I just want to mention something I thought I heard too, is this discussion of optionality here, sort of, and how it informs standard setting, right, or not. And I know as a board member now, I'm starting to have to think about these things that do that. And and Joel and Paulina will attest, I talk to them about it because it's a struggle, because it depends on how you think. Like, do we need to become more prescriptive in line items, for example? And the question is, what do you think the technology is going to enable into the future, right? So that we've always historically allowed this flexibility. And if I keep this flexibility, will the technology get smart enough that no matter what you call it, the technology will figure out what it means and will put it in the proper place? Or do I need to limit what governments can do and what they can call it in order to facilitate that? And so I'm caught a lot of times trying to figure out what is the best answer to proceed upon without what I sort of feel full information, right? Because I don't know what the future technology is going to enable. So I'm trying to figure out as best I can and try to bring into deliberations like, hey, do we need to be more prescriptive here or not? And we have to have those discussions in order to be able to hammer through what we think the best solutions are.
Scott?
Yeah, love it. I would just to respond to Jeff there. I think that the more structured the data, the easier it is for me as a human to consume it. And so I think that that is a way that we can think about technology. Certainly AI needs it more, but even me, like, if you keep doing standards just for humans, then I think that you would want to have more structured and prescriptive. But just to throw it out too, so that Washington isn't like just the only one. I mean, we're also talking about federal agencies like FERC or REACT for the housing authorities. So I'm hopeful that by GASB leading in this area, that that sets a foundation for everyone to get more standardized. But also affirming the fact that the objective of this is not standardization. And Joel probably doesn't want us to even say standardization because that creates fear for this project. And we want to manage that change and have everyone just realize like, it's going to be all right. It's only going to be good.
With that, back to you, Paulina.
Okay, so I'm going to show you a little bit more in the practical side, the government specific line items. So we walk through the taxonomy. The capital asset had essentially 3 bits, and then you saw how to apply it. So now in a place where this is a actual bit of a financial statements, the government had land, another line item of long list of things, construction in progress, and right to use. Okay. If you look through the taxonomy, the line item called building improvements and so whatnot, it was a huge amount of aggregation of line items that were detailed on the taxonomy. On the other hand, the right to use assets were significantly disaggregated from what we put in the taxonomy. So clearly the red and the green are going to have to be government specific information. But for them to not just be line items randomly floating around the world of ether, we have decided that government-specific line items need to be associated with existing taxonomy line items to be able to provide context. So when the user extract government-specific information, they still at least have a relational issue. Remember, the taxonomy is a system of organizing information. So even government-specific would be lovely to fit in the structure to convey to the user what is the relationship to other things. So in the case of building improvements, infrastructure, and intangibles, because there were so many things into the line item, I thought is mostly closely associated with depreciable line items. That's not much I can do with that. But with the rights to use, we have an intangible capital assets net, and we have components in there that a government can associate. And so it just creates a link that it's a virtue of the software interface that you're going to be dealing with. And for all intent and purposes, a preparer will just put plus, put the line item and associate it with something, click another button and all done. But for a structural perspective, when somebody extracts that government specific line item, will have contextual information of where it was associated with. And so that provides, we believe, a balance between the flexibility of government specific information and the need to have structure. I would not use the S word, but just structure. And so that way it creates that balance between the flexibility governments need plus the structure that a user needs to be able to create relational databases. When the line item, a lot of people ask the question, what happens when you have this mix of government specific and taxonomy defined line items? Is this going to be a mess? No, the user is just going to see something slightly different for one, slightly different for the other, but it's in the same data structure. This really should not cause any disruption any more than it doesn't cause disruption when the government is creating a government specific. Hit the plus button, put your name, and associate it with something and off to the races. It should not create complexity. That's pretty much the end of my topics and line items. And I think you all had asked kind of a lot of questions. So I'm going to go to MD&A, but if you have any questions on line items, this is your last shot. Okay. So we've talked about the financial statements, which are what most people focus on when we're talking about digitization, modules, headers, line items. But now we're going to the slightly less structured information included in the notes and in the MD&A. They're called unstructured data because, as you know, it's just a narrative format. So it's a paragraph where you have gone yada, yada, yada about your financial statements. No headers, no line items, no structures. How do we do this? The way the taxonomy models this is through something called a text box. So if you were working with a PDF, you highlight, you put a text and you put a comment to it, that's a text box. Nothing more complicated than that. And so then in the unstructured modeling, the conversation really is about how many text boxes do you need? And so this is all about granularity and how much you break it down and why. It's not about how, because it's just a text box, but it's about how many boxes. And so the way we had initially designed our module is essentially you would have a large text block for basically every note, and don't get to there too quickly, I'll get there. Then for every table in the note, you would have a level 2 block. And then for every detail line item, let's say the capital asset roll forward, you would have a level 3 text block. And so then the next question that would be in your head, top of mind, is going to be how many note disclosures and how consistent they are across governments. Remember our common practice conversation from earlier? This is just to the nth power. So we've been looking through financial statements also through samples of ACFRs, and we have identified that there's a significant, everybody knows note 1 is summary of significant accounting policy, so that one doesn't count. But starting after that, there's a significant commonality in which people go around the narrative. And the sequential order doesn't matter, by the way. The text boxes are super flexible. So even if you have summary of significant accounting policies as your very last note, it's fine. So the sequencing doesn't affect. What it does matter is the number of level 1 topics that we need to identify. Capital assets is straightforward. At this moment, we have not observed anybody who stray away from one note for capital assets. There is some straying around whether you put the leases information in there or not. That's a common practice observation, but there's a capital asset note. Long-term debt has been fun. In the East Coast, prevalently a single long-term note and everything in it. In the Western states, they disaggregate the long-term debt into multiple boxes. Note 1 is the roll forward of the long-term debt. The next one is geo bonds, then revenue bonds, then something bonds, and there's a lot of notes on bonds. And so very different miscellaneous other liabilities. So everybody does it slightly differently. So we're trying to create a system where their flexibility can be preserved. And there's some commonality so the government can use this L1 protocol to encompass all the notes to financial statements. Another messy bit is that towards the end when people put commitments, contingency, litigation, and everything under the sink in it, we're trying to create a little bit of more granularity to make sure we don't miss topics. So it depends on which area of the note you're working through. It's a little bit more stable than others. But we're trying to create is these themes around what is prevalently observed in practice. We did give it a shot about thinking through what would happen if we were to put a line item for every reporting requirement that is in section 2300, and you will wind up with hundreds and hundreds of L1s. And people just cluster the note topics around things that are meaningful to them. So we're starting from common practice. We're crosswalking them to the codification to ensure things are not missed. But that's the approach that we have taken. Then with regards to granularity, we provide you an example in the slides about how we thought about MD&A. So in MD&A, we start, what about if we have considered 3 options? And in this slide in the screen, which I don't know which slide is, option number 1 is essentially having a single block of text to the entire MD&A. So you put 1 block of text MD&A, you're done. In option 2, we broke down the MD&A into additional 4 boxes that were aligned to the provisions statement 103. So this is not all guidance. This is 103 compliant. And we grouped the financial summary and the detail analysis because they're naturally interject into each other. And then we put the other 3 components of the MD&A in there. And then we thought about what happens if we really break this down by every single requirement that is provided in MD&A, including currently known facts, decisions, and conditions. We provided 5 examples, and they're highlighted as examples with the idea that a government has different differently known facts, conditions, and they can put their own. And this is what the model looked like. Then we went ahead and talked to users of financial statements, and they went, no, we don't use MD&A that way. This is how we use MD&A. We use it as a single document. We read head to end because it's contextual for us. This is what we use to ground us in the analysis, to start about it. How do we think about it? So then we poked a little bit around them and I said, okay, so if you were in a digitized format, would you be able to use level 2, the one we broke it out into 5 boxes? Would you be able to use that for analytical purposes? It was a lukewarm reaction, maybe. And so what that became is an important conversation of what level of detail should note disclosures be broken down. And so we're in the process of having this conversation with the board. The structure, as I noted in slide 29, is the basic structure when you have a big box, a table box, and a detail box. But then you have to put yourself in the world of a preparer. The more boxes you put, the more work it is, right? And the more it costs. So we're talking about cost and effort. So if you're going to make a government put more boxes in the notes to financials, you better be sure that the user is going to consume and use it in that format. Otherwise, what you're doing is creating a lot of cost with marginal benefit. And so we're in the midst of this conversation. And so, for example, for the MD&A, we have tentatively got to option 2 as a balance between too much and too little. And definitely option 3, where every reporting requirement with disaggregated and tables and the line, that was a non-starter. Prepare users of financial statements to not consume the MD&A in that manner. Therefore, we thought it wasn't necessary. That is unstructured data. We are going to be, for the purposes of discussion memorandum, including the themes that we have come up with. I'm doubtful to commit to a number because we're still in the process of working them and reconciling them. What I can tell you is on average, a large government has about 20 notes. On average, a small government has 10 notes. And they do group them. And so to have 100, 150 level 1 boxes does not seem reasonable, but we need to ensure that the L1 boxes that we propose are encompassing of the reporting requirements so that they can be embedded and incited with it. That's where we are with this. Any feedback, I'm happy to.
Any additional things to share with Paulina? Abel?
Abel Palacios, ACI. I appreciate the explanation, Paulina. You did a great job explaining the information. I do like the word voluntary on this information. I think from a preparer perspective from ACI, Joel mentioned it earlier, airports are a little bit different from a lot of the government entities. I can think of maybe 3 or 4 reporting repositories that airports provide today. And much to Bob Scott's comment to ask the staff to integrate another voluntary mechanism. I appreciate the detail on the information, but I think it's a large ask for some of our airports, and just wanted to provide that feedback. I know Bill made that comment. I'm curious to see how many folks end up volunteering for this information. But I'm not saying it's not a great product, but. And actually, one more thing that I was thinking of from a user perspective, our direct users, because I've heard that theme throughout the discussion, the users are wanting this information. From our airports, the direct users are our bankers, our bond counsel, and our rating agencies, and they have the direct access to our information, and we provide that detail. So there's other folks that are users. I understand that from an analytical perspective, but from a direct user perspective from airports, we provide some of that detail on an individual basis.
Rob?
From a bond rater's perspective, we don't. And that's part of the problem. And maybe your bigger ones are providing that information on a pretty regular basis and have it in a pretty standard format and something that we can use. But, you know, at Moody's, we cover 10,000 issuers across all these different sectors. And again, this is going to be voluntary, so we're not going to get the smaller ones. But this is a huge win for the users, for us. I mean, it takes us at this point now between the time that the audit gets published to the time that we ingest it, it could take weeks. This will give us, as Paulina was saying before, hours. And that's an enormous change in how we as a rating agency can ensure that the ratings that we have in the public space are still accurate based on the information being published. It just gives us a lot more timely information. So, I mean, I know I've had conversations with Point in the past about this, but this is a massive, massive deal for the users of financial statements, and I don't think that can be understated.
And I appreciate those comments. And we work with Moody's as one of our rating agencies, as you well know. And when we issue our debts, oftentimes that information is stale. So I know Moody's is relying on interim financial reporting, which we regularly provide, and forward-looking information of where our future capital projects are, et cetera. I know you guys run your own analysis and all that information. Not saying it's not beneficial for you guys, but oftentimes that information is a bit stale.
Again, I agree, it is stale that we're getting it, but I think in your organization, your airport is very different than I think a lot of the other, municipalities or governments that we'll be working with, where we only get one audit a year. And we don't get forward-looking, we don't get interim statements. What you're providing us, especially during a rating call, is probably way more than we're gonna get on an annual basis, where we're having to surveil these municipalities. And that's the challenge. And again, it would be interesting, I think Bill was talking about, to see who actually opts into this. But I think it does have the potential to be a game changer.
Dean?
Let me echo, Dean Mead, NFMA. Let me echo what Robert just said. First, by saying how incredibly important this is to the members of NFMA, some of whom are analysts in rating agencies, but most of whom are not, and don't have the same kind of pull with respect to acquiring data from issuers that rating agencies have. Rating agencies have, I'm sure they wish they had even greater capacity to demand information, but it's a lot more than any of our buy-side folks have. The people in the mutual funds, in the insurance companies doing the investments for the casualty insurance companies, they can ask, but most governments are going to go, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll get on that right away. They don't have any rationale for it. So it's incredibly important to those types of users, and then also to the GRA types. Stephen's not here to speak for them, but I've belonged to that organization for a long time and worked for one of them for a while. I can tell you how challenging it is for them in the absence of databases that have comparable information across governments to do these kinds of analyses, and they can't afford to pay the cost of a data provider to get the information, and the academics, who are those who work in the government sphere or might want to work in the government sphere, looking at what happened with the Form 990s and dreaming about public databases being created out of this information, sometime after FDTA becomes, functional. It can't be understated the potential boon to academic research that would come from that. We saw it with Edgar. We saw it with the Form 990s for not-for-profits, and the people in the government area are saying, it's our turn now, and so it's not just the rating agencies; it's the municipal bond industry in general that is looking at this, as potentially the biggest thing that's ever happened to them in terms of getting data, and other types of users are looking at this the same way.
Bill?
I just have a question. It seems like, I don't know the extent of the detail, that you went from entity-wide MD&A notes So you're doing combining statements as well, or you're stopping there, or and then ACFR side? Are you going full ACFR or just?
Yes, but it's a matter of when. It's not a matter of what. So let me get you back to the slide. It's in slide 5. Yep. And so for the DM, we're only getting a handful of things. But in here, the phases of the taxonomy have 2 places. So basic financials include government-wide and combining, as well as notes and RSI, because that's what you provide. That's the basic information you can provide an opinion with. So that's where we stop right there. But then when we are good and done with that bit, we plan to expand it to RSI in a second phase. And so therefore you have a full ACFR. The part that I would caution you is particularly from a user perspective, the word ACFR, and that's why I avoided in the conversation, means a whole lot more than this.
All right. Joel?
Sort of, I think wrap up, Paulina can wrap up too, but to wrap up from my perspective, and this kind of stems from some of the conversation we just had, at least, and Paulina actually said this a bit in the presentation, so I'm being somewhat repetitive, but this project to me, the tagging, what are preparers going to do part of it? Is anybody going to volunteer? Does anybody want to add this on? That's a thing for the next 5 years or whatever it is. 5 years from now, 8 years from now, whatever time period it is, people are going to have programmed their AI agents to take PDFs or government financial information without any of the tags or any of this stuff to be able to convert it into usable data for any research organization or rating agency, et cetera. The importance of this project, and Paulina said this in her presentation, is to ultimately train the AI agents, is to provide a structure that the AI agents can ingest, understand, and be taught and use to take that government financial information and convert it without the governments having to tag or even the AI agents having to create the tags. There's going to be no tagging at some point. It's just going to be knowledge. But to me, this project is equally, if not more important in that environment than today's environment, because at that point, all users are going to be using it in some way, shape, or form. And this builds on GAP, uses GAP, et cetera. It provides a structure that we then are comfortable as GAP standards saying, yeah, the data is structured the right way. It's organized the right way. It uses GAP. I think that's important for all of us to remember and understand about the project. And I don't know, I understand, and XBRL is what we're kind of using now because it's the available tool, and tagging is kind of how people do it now. So we have to talk in those terms, but we don't lose sight of how this is going to be used in the future, and it will be important.
Thank you for that, Joel. And clearly this project takes a lot of time and effort by Paulina and Mio and others on the council. So really, or on the team, just really appreciate all the work that's gone into it and appreciate all the time. I know, Sophie, you've got some comments, but I just wanted to say thank you for your leadership on this and the boards, stepping into this space. Personally, I think it's important that the GASB does fill that space, and I appreciate that it has. So thank you for your work on that. Sophia?
Thank you, Sophia DiCaro, NGA. Just to echo the comments that were just made, but also just an observation that this could be a significant opportunity for the academia realm. And I would just, I see the opportunity here for users to partner with academia to, train the next generation, but also have this tool and be able to provide it to the preparers who don't have the capacity to be able to do it. But just throwing that out there, this seems like a huge opportunity for academia. Thanks.
Any final thoughts, Paulina?
Just very appreciative of the feedback and all the the support and the comments. It does help us. It does help us calibrate. We have to, as I mentioned, present and communicate this to a very varied audience. So it's helpful to know when you understand. It's helpful to know when you have questions. So very appreciative for the feedback.
Right. So the next item on the agenda is the report of the executive committee and other business. I recognize that this is really the thing that is keeping us from not only lunch, but also departing for the day. So I will keep it brief. I wanted to start by acknowledging our executive committee members, Suzanne Lowenson, our vice chair, Christine Brock, Ricky Hatch, Scott Deviney, Harriet Richardson, and Rob Weber. So thank you for your service on the executive committee. We did meet on Friday. You may recall from the last update that I gave at our July meeting that we didn't have an executive committee meeting in the summer. So it was important that we met again just to reflect on how the year has gone. And we talked about the upcoming changes we have in staff, like I talked about, or excuse me, council members that I talked about earlier. I wanted to make a note that the upcoming FAF meeting, and Aaron talked about it, there will be, for our departing council members, the successors will be considered, including our new vice chair, and announcements will be coming as those appointments are made. So be on the lookout for those announcements, just knowing that we'll have some new members that will be joining our council and be attending in our March meeting. So looking forward to that. We also talked about how we felt like the meetings have gone this year. We all agreed that the discussion has been really robust, really appreciated people being really active with their perspectives and sharing. We saw that again today. A lot of really good discussion. People have not been shy to share their perspectives. Clearly, you're going back to your constituency organizations and gathering their feedback and bringing them forward to help just help the staff and the board just make decisions as they go forward. So thank you for your contributions on that. We also recognize and we're grateful for new members. They jumped right in. There was really no hesitancy. It seemed like they were ready, they were prepared, they were really forthcoming with their comments. So appreciate that. And we know that there are some mentors that are helping new members come alongside, getting prepared and what that looks like to be a GASAC member. So thank you to our mentors, our new members, just looking forward to that continuing into the future. But we were just we all recognized and we were all appreciative of just how much that came across with our new members. And then we also talked about the prioritization exercise. We have one coming up in March. As everyone here knows, that is our a pretty significant effort where every member of our council, we go around the room and we talk about our highs and our mediums. That's where sharing your perspective is required as we go around the room and how that went. And we talked about it really is forwarding what really does matter. What do we want the board to spend time on from a high or a medium perspective? We have a lot of things to go through. And so I know with the last one, there's a little bit of perhaps a little unclear as to what we were rating as high, whether it was just something we think is important or whether we think it's something the board should look at. So we talked about how can we be a little bit clearer on this is the stuff that we really do want the board to spend time on, a potential project or to consider whether it's research or things like that. So as we move forward into March of 2026 and we get that prioritization exercise, just thinking about how can we I guess let me put it this way, emphasizing that it is the stuff that we want the board to consider adding to their technical agenda or perhaps make it a future project. But like I said, on balance, we were really just grateful for the year that we've had, looking forward to 2026. And this has just been a great year and like I said, looking forward to some more to come. Speaking of 2026, I think I've seen it with a number of you, the green sheets do have our tentative dates. So please add those to your calendars so that we can, just knowing that there's a lot that is involved with coming to these meetings. We know that there's a to be determined for the June meeting and we'll have that information as we're ready to announce it. But if you can hopefully get these on your calendar and just know that these meetings are where they'll be and what to look forward to. And I'll pause there and see if anybody has any questions. Seeing none. So thank you again. There is lunch going to be happening, I think, right out in the hallway. So if you are staying for lunch, looking forward to the conversation there. Safe travels for everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful holiday season. Thank you again to our departing members. Thank you for all your contributions. And all right, see everyone next time.